Hey guys, Jonathan here with TLD. Hope you guys are doing well. I am back with a very exciting video as we now have a closer look and sneak peek of what to expect with the upcoming iPad Air 2, otherwise known as the 6th generation iPad. Now real quickly, taking a stroll back down memory lane in terms of the history of the iPad, of course it all started with the original 1st generation iPad. It was then followed by the iPad 2. Then strangely enough, for the 3rd generation iPad, Apple decided to call it the new iPad. And strange naming scheme aside, that was significant because it brought the Retina display to the iPad, taking that 1024 by 768 resolution and bumping it up to 2048 by 1536. Now shortly thereafter, and in fact it was the same exact year Apple released the 3rd generation iPad, they decided to bump out the 4th generation. And what was different with that compared to the 3rd is it not only brought a much more powerful processor and GPU, but it also brought the Lightning port to the iPad, kind of unifying it with Apple's flagship products at that time. Rewind back to last year, 2013, Apple released its 5th generation iPad, which we now know as the iPad Air. And that was big because it definitely brought back some life and some freshness to the iPad lineup, taken after its little bros design, the iPad mini, in terms of the sleekness, the thinness, and the actual looks of the iPad. Now, as of recording this video, it is June 2014, and that means we are only a couple months away from the next generation iPad. And I actually got my hands on what appears to be the alleged iPad Air 2 dummy model. Now, huge thank you to Sonny Dixon for making this happen. I'm sure by now most of you have probably heard of him. He is the Apple leak master. If not, I will have him linked down below. So what exactly does this iPad Air 2 dummy model tell us about Apple's next generation iPad? And there's actually a few different things. The first of them being there isn't going to be a huge change design-wise or form factor compared to the original iPad Air. You can see the bezel looks very similar. If you do, however, look at them side by side, you can see that this model is a little bit thinner than the current iPad Air. That measures in at a thickness of 7.5 millimeters, whereas this comes in at about 6 to 6.5 millimeters, so it is a little bit thinner than the current iPad Air. Here you can see there's a slight difference on this model of the speakers compared to the current iPad Air. That has 2 rows of speaker grills, left and right, whereas this one has a single row, both left and right. The downside of this though is that there will be no front-facing speakers on the next generation iPad. I know it wasn't rumored or talked about, but if you've used the HTC One M7 or M8, you know how important and how awesome this feature could be, and I just want it on the next iPad. Now this next thing is probably the single thing in this video that I would take with a grain of salt and not really look too deeply into, and that is the fact that the dummy model is slightly heavier than the current iPad Air, but of course there are no internal parts, there are no physical components, so again this is not a big thing or not something I would look to compare. Now moving up towards the top of the dummy model iPad Air 2, the volume rockers up and down are in the exact same spot, but if you notice and you really look closely, they're actually a little more recessed as opposed to popping out like on the current iPad Air, so that may be a good thing depending on how you look at it. So those are some of the smaller differences that I've noticed, but I think the biggest thing, and if you're looking at this and it's probably screaming at you, is the difference of the home button on this model compared to the current iPad Air. Much to all of our disappointment, the iPad Air did not include the Touch ID fingerprint reader like we saw on the iPhone 5S, so you can see unlike the current iPad Air, which has that classic Apple, kind of vintage now, square home button, this now has the familiar looking ring home button that's going to give us access to the Touch ID fingerprint reader. Now to briefly touch upon that, because I've used the iPhone 5S and the iPad Air, once I got used to the iPhone 5S, not having it on the iPad Air was definitely noticeable, so this would be a much welcome feature on the iPad Air 2. So that about wraps up this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did and you are feeling like being awesome, make sure to hit that like button. It is much appreciated, and of course I will throw a virtual high five at your face. Now as far as what we talked about in this video, definitely let me know what is most exciting or appealing to you in the upcoming iPad Air 2, or just let me know what you'd want to see most in Apple's next generation iPad. If you guys have any questions on the upcoming iPad Air 2, the iPhone 6, or just tech in general, the absolute best way to get a hold of me is on Twitter at TLDtoday. I am on there pretty much all the time, so you will more than likely get a reply. Aside from that, again, thank you guys very much for watching. If you have not subscribed, make sure to do that. That way you don't miss out on any coverage of the future iPad Air 2 or the iPad Pro if that ever comes out, or of course, the iPhone 6. If you guys missed anything at all, that will all be recapped down in the description, including pictures of the iPad Air 2 mock-up, as well as the gear that I used to create these videos. Again, this is Jonathan, and I will see you guys later.